So this is the second engagement that we're going to be looking at tonight. And I know I was fortunate to sit in on the first one last week with Corinne and the conversation. So it was nice to hear some of the responses in terms of what the community was looking at. So today I want to actually take into consideration what we heard last week, but also help expand the conversation in terms of what you guys are looking at and what opportunities might be in front of us at the same time. Audio's back. Thank you, David. So with that said, part of the research that we're doing here is really trying to ground the project and some of the priorities that the community has been looking at over the last couple of years. And that's part of us doing our due diligence and making sure that we're up to date in terms of some of your latest efforts and some of the initiatives going on in the community. So at the very beginning, I want to use this slide here just to kind of position this conversation ethically in terms of what the community is trying to achieve with their lands at the same time. So in short, the engagement aims to ensure that housing solutions reflect community values, support cultural continuity, promote the well-being, and build local capacity. That is something that really resonated with the conversation last week. But at the same time, as we were doing our research on our end, we noticed that you guys do have some land laws coming into effect in the future for discussion. And one of the things that really stood out to me was the responsibility to care for and respect the environment, habitat, natural resources, ecosystem, and Kanesatake land in accordance with the obligation of the members and their ancestors since time immemorial. I thought that was a very important piece of information for us to consider as we move forward to make sure that any type of development that goes forward really respects the land laws of the community and the environmental impacts that they'll be looking at in the future. And so at the same time, we want to have a discussion that's going to prioritize the integration and celebration of the Kanesatake tradition, culture, and meaningful forms. That's going to help us guide our design process as we move forward and the information that we're going to gather. But at the same time, as we were putting together this research, we also wanted to have an online survey to help capture some of the information. And we're going to share this at the end of the presentation later on, that some of the key aspects that we want to talk about are issues of social cohesion amongst housing. What is culturally relevant about housing, the viability of the project types that you might be looking at to the future, the whole notion of sustainability, the ecology, traditional ecological knowledge, where does that come into play, but also the technical training opportunities that this project might offer you guys. So in many ways, the survey is set up in 5 different areas from the social, cultural, economic, ecological, and traditional perspective. So we'll share that at the end of the presentation. So I thought it was important to really position this conversation tonight in regards to what's in front of us right now and how we're actually building on what you have working for your community. And so the agenda for this evening is, we're just going to start with the welcome and introductions. We've already done that. We introduced ourselves at Tawaw as the project team. We'll go over the project scope. We'll talk about our approach, the table of contents, tonight's conversations about some of the goals that we have in mind. So I'm just going to go through the engagement, the workshop goals, look at a bit about the site selection that the community might is considering as they move forward. We're going to share a bit about what we do in terms of place-based research, but I think it's the second last line that's going to really be important to discuss in terms of the life cycle, the key aspects, the success indicators, and the evaluation frameworks moving forward, and then followed by the community survey. Again, like we said, we have the team on your end led by Corinne, and we have the Tawaw team, but the project scope for the most part is these engagement sessions that are going to lead to the design investigation of a triplex building for families and children. At the end of the day, the chosen design is going to be a prototype for future Kanesatake family housing and development. So in short, for the most part, we've shared this part before in terms of our approach. We just want to go over this and make sure that everybody understands how we go about doing not only the consultations, but the design, right? And so we always start up with the startup meetings. We have a roadmap. We measure, we do place-based research in terms of the community that we're working with. We look for community engagement, the engagement process. We look for design drivers as we move forward into beyond the feasibility study. We'll start to look for design drivers based on the feedback we receive from the community. Then we'll go through a code design process. We'll cycle back a couple of times with the advisory housing committee to see what their thoughts are. And then we'll start to move forward into design concept and hopefully move towards a final set of drawings for the community to move forward and have a conversation around. As we do this, the table of contents, what I'm sharing here with you tonight is a brief part of the feasibility study. So I'm giving you a glimpse into where we're at right now as we move forward. So we are really moving quite quickly with the research component, and the more information we gather is only going to support this feasibility study as we move along. So tonight's basically an introduction. We'll talk briefly about the strategic and community planning documents you provided us with. We'll go over that fairly quickly. We'll talk about the site selection, like I said, based on the criteria only at this point. Place-based research. This is what we know about Kanasatake and the traditions of Haudenosaunee. We'll look at housing types. We'll talk about material selection and passive design strategies. We'll get into that conversation later. But what are some of the success indicators? What do they look like? And so these are questions that are going to come forward as we move along. Again, I'm going to slow down now. Important for us was to really go over your information, and going back in terms of the documents that you guys are able to provide us with. And so we do have information at the 2018. Beyond that, if we can gather more information as we move along from this survey and the information from the first session, as we go through the transcripts, hopefully we can pull away some more critical information. We always keep in mind the land use plan that you have in front of us, and also the climate adaptation plan. The housing component, as we're moving along, is really engaging with the last two documents and really trying to keep a lot of that information relevant and really drive it forward at the same time. So this is stuff that we're going to be talking about later on. What I want to do here right now, we had a couple of meetings back last fall, back on December 12th, and there was another one just last week. Again, just reinforcing the site selection criteria, not choosing us at a determined site at the moment, but hopefully I guess you would say the conceptual design phase as we move forward with concepts and how they are going to fit in with the site, and what are the pros and cons to each site, and how is the housing going to respond to the site conditions. I think that's very important to keep in mind, and it's going to be important based on the housing typology the community is going to choose to go with. And so tonight, I'm just going to try to paint the picture in terms of some of the pros and cons associated with each of the typologies that are up for grabs, and then hopefully paint this with a larger picture in terms of criteria, very important criteria I keep coming back to in terms of site selection. So for those of us who are joining us the first time, again, this is just the Kanasatake lands, the context that we're looking at, and based on that first couple of conversations, just on site selection, we had a conversation in terms of the physical characteristics of the proposed building site. What are the topographic conditions, in terms of access to infrastructure, soil runoff, water runoff, accessibility, turnabouts, etc. What is the main infrastructure that's going to be offered from site to site? And so that's still up for discussion. Again, considering the existing soil conditions, what is the water retention of some of this site, the natural drainage, the surface runoff, all of this stuff comes into consideration when it comes to parking, etc. In terms of what's going to happen on the site with the community, especially if you're looking for a greenhouse of some sort. What's going to be the situation? How are we going to be able with that? Important points are access points, circulation, bus routes, delivery trucks. Construction materials, having to load information to load building materials, like how much can the site offer in that regard. Having to consider passenger and emergency vehicles, in terms of accessibility, again, is going to be a huge factor in terms of determining how this facility is going to be positioned on the site. And obviously, supportive infrastructure when it comes to water and wastewater, fire hydrants, streetlights, etc. So this is a lot of the stuff that's going into consideration in the criteria that we have to look at as we move forward. Again, during that first phase, it was a very interesting conversation in terms of how the community might want to approach the development of future housing. And obviously, priority number one was a multifamily rental unit. Whether that was going to be 1, 2, 3, 4 units is still up for conversation. And so as we move forward through the information, we'll be able to move towards a more solidified proposition. But at the same time, there was future housing development. So whether one site or two sites was going to be the way to go, and the capacity of those sites is obviously very important to consider. And the third phase was looking at an agricultural hub, some sort of land-based focus, greenhouse daycare, adjacent to youth schooling, etc. So there was a lot of parameters at play in terms of how we evaluated and looked at the community last December, and hopefully moving forward. And obviously there was another cultural component that we thought was really interesting to looking at something in the public realm for the community, seek a power ground perhaps, and looking at the wetlands and remediation of all these sites altogether. So this is just criteria. It's not per site, but it's criteria that can apply across many sites at the same time, right? So we want to keep this in mind as we move forward with the housing development and make sure that we can hopefully hit on some of these targets in a good way. And so part of our approach, again, like you said, is that we do a place-based research approach. I don't want to run too deep into this part because I think, for the most part, I know we're speaking to the community already. And it's not only, I guess, not for us to educate yourselves and your own community, but just for us to come to and a better understanding of who we're working with and what kind of traditions that we're working in at the same time. So obviously, we understand that we're working with the Haudenosaunee community and that there's a composition of 6 different nations. We understand there's different traditions with each one of these nations. So we are working very closely and taking our time with the research in terms of how is the culture, how is the cultural form going to inform this type of housing complex at the same time. So we're trying to bridge tradition with contemporary needs and understanding there are social values, cultural values, ecological values that we can carry forward into not only the spatial representation of it, but also some of the capacity and the economics and the politics of housing that go into play. So for the most part, we understand where we're coming from, the community that we're working with, Kanesatake, in terms of some of the shared traditions around the area. So, and for the most part, this is just us doing our due diligence again. One of the things that really stood out when I go through the research is looking at this notion of what your community means on crusty land, right? And so it really paints a picture in terms of the soil composition within the area. And so I know we've talked about different typologies at this point, but it's something for me that really stands out in terms of maybe load-bearing capacity of the site and the porosity of the site and maybe the subsurface conditions, whether it's a lot of soil or clay. Clay tends to hold a lot of water at the same time, right? So these are factors that are always coming into play as we move forward. One of the things we do is a place-based narrative, right? So actually listening to the community conversation, the narrative of the community, and making sure that, as we go through this process, that we stay true to our process, which you see on the bottom, through the engagement and the co-design and the storytelling aspect of place. And I think that is something, the question that came up about identity in this project, making sure that the community is able to see themselves. Do they see themselves in the housing? Do they see themselves in the construction? Does the housing form represent the traditional form, the longhouse, in some way, right? So there's a lot of ingredients at play here that we want to consider and take our time with and make sure that, at the end of the day, we present a project that is very meaningful to the project, to the community at the same time. One of the questions that came up earlier on is how are we going to represent this project, based on a Haudenosaunee longhouse? And so these are things that we're going to be looking at, passive strategies, considerate of, the role that wood plays and help. Wood tends to offer a lot of help and well-being benefits to community, just the sensory environment that wood offers. So we're really very much aware of the interior finishes of what this building might look like or what it might feel like, whether or not there's a lot of stone, what's the role of stone in terms of foundations. We know it's part of our ceremonial aspect when we do sweats, etc. But it'll be interesting to hear more about how we can actually play with the material palette of the home. So we're really considering everything from, knowledge, wood, practices, ceremony, the notion of a greenhouse. Haudenosaunee is very much an agricultural community culture. So we have a lot of things to pull at the same time. So we're really taking our time in terms of sifting through the information. Again, traditional practices, we understand the Three Sisters, very artisan-based culture, hunting, fishing, medicinal plants, shifting knowledge, the whole notion of indigenous knowledge and how that is transforming because of climate change. Again, going all the way back to your first document in terms of how you think of climate resiliency. So the housing response is going to try to take as many factors as we can and try to build on some of the cultural foundations that is in place already, and then move forward from there and hopefully come away with maybe a couple of different concepts that are really going to resonate with the housing committee and the community as we move forward. So with that said, again, just thinking about more material and archetypes, this was a question that came up. How are you going to represent this in a cultural way? And so this is something after the conversations, like I said, hopefully we'll be able to pull all this information together and, weave it into the design in some way. And so we're looking forward to that next phase after the survey and after we get the more information from the community. So this is the part of the presentation that I'm going to slow it down now, because I think it's important to not just present you guys with a number of different typologies, but more so the steps involved and the decision-making process of how you're actually going to move forward with a specific type of home. One of the things we did here was to really step back, and we heard the questions about this is what we want, this is what we think the community should move towards, this is our initiatives in terms of building capacity, but at the same time, like I said, going back to that first slide of looking at the ethics and the land codes that you guys are working with, where does this housing fit in that conversation in terms of a stewardship responsibility to community and land, et cetera? So from a life cycle assessment, I think we've seen these type of images before. We have to consider the production of this facility, this house or number of units that you're going to be looking at. And when we say production, we're talking right from raw material production, the manufacturing, the transportation, whether it's built in place or whether it's built in a prefabricated situation under quality conditions. We got to look at the construction process, the installation process, and the transportation of goods to the site. We also got to think about the maintenance and repair and the replacement and refurbishment of parts. So essentially the operation and maintenance of the facility over the course of time. And then we got to think about the end of life cycle, the destruction of waste processing, disposal, and transportation, knowing that buildings for the most part are, they're built to last a long time, but the way things are going today with climate change and the weather conditions, et cetera, we're having to look at more robust materials, whether they're in place for 100 years or whether they're in place for 10 years, and you have to replace certain parts, like a roof every 30 years, you got to replace your roof, your windows every 15 to 20 years. So all these factors are going to come into play, and understanding that technology is going to change at the same time. So considering what typology you're going to be looking at, there's a whole bunch of aspects that we have to consider as we move forward. Obviously, thinking about reuse, recycling, and energy recovery, and what facilities are going to offer or hit higher marks in terms of the type of home you want to construct in the community. On the right-hand side, just as a brief percentage breakdown, I wanted to give you a sense of what a new home construction might look like and the factors that you have to take into consideration. So obviously site work, that's going to be part of the site selection process. Again, the criteria that has to go into it. Then there's foundation. Foundation is very important, a very critical part of the selection process. I can tell you right now, in terms of doing the feasibility study, writing it up, as I look at 6 different types of construction, the foundation is going to be a very important piece to play in terms of how you're going to be looking at it. So that's another piece of the feasibility study that I'm really diving into right now. Then there's obviously the type of framing system that's going to be used for the house itself. Then there's the exterior qualities of the house. Then you have the major systems on the inside, the HVAC, the water distribution, et cetera. And then it comes to interior finishes, and then final steps, the handing over to community, right? So you start to see the percentage breakdown of what a new house may look like in terms of moving forward. And from the life cycle assessment from the very beginning, the capital costs that go into investing into this project, right down to the handing over, turning over the keys to the tenants. There's a major process of understanding which way to go and which methods and what's going to offer you the most, in terms of what you're going to be looking forward. So I wanted to give you a kind of a bookend analogy to consider as we move forward. So when I talked about the new home construction, one of the aspects that really comes into play when I was looking at all the different typologies and considered how do each one of these houses, how are they broken down? How are they relatable? And how can we measure each of them compared to one another, going into it? And so the key aspect that really came across was the capital costs was the number one. And then construction time. And then embodied carbon, because again, going back to your land stewardship, Indigenous people being stewards of the land, trying to do more with less, and having very efficient cultural systems in play where, a lot of our interventions are very light on the land. And so just thinking about the whole embodied carbon process throughout. And then obviously you come down to the thermal performance of the building itself, right, the life cycle at the end. So giving you a sense in terms of what you see here, again, the breakdown of the house, the construction cost to the production, to the extraction of materials, the construction on-site or off-site is a very important decision to consider. But then again, it's the maintaining and use and the end life that I find very important, the embodied carbon, in terms of how the house is withstanding to the environment, what we're taking away, the energy that's coming in and the energy that's coming and going. I know earlier on, Chief Amy was talking about a lot of your existing housing stock it costs a lot more to do repairs than it is to actually build. So, really trying to find a balance between the housing typology you're looking forward to. Then again, you got the embodied, the reuse, the recovery of the house in itself. Is there a long-term maintenance plans? There's things that have to be repaired, or is there stuff that's going to have to be recycled as after 10, 15 years? So just giving you a larger picture in terms of how we're looking at our approach to the design of this housing. It's not based just on a select material or a select site, but the entire gambit, looking at the entirety of the house and what's going to go into the unit from start to finish. And so when I talk about the capital cost, I talk about these four important aspects. And so part of the system that we've been creating is an evaluation chart to think about how we're actually going to move about this selection process. And for everybody in the room, I'm hoping you'll see that the capital cost, the construction time, the embodied carbon, and the thermal performance are the four largest criteria factors for the selection process. There's categories such as cost, speed and efficiency, environmental impact, energy efficiency, structural performance and durability, design flexibility, social and regulatory acceptance. Whether you got land codes or building codes or some of the even codes in the community. Each one of these is going to be measured against a certain criteria. And there's descriptions, right? So when we talk about the four key ones, we're talking about the upfront construction and material cost, the capital cost of what you're going to be looking at, the duration of the build, whether it's on-site or off-site, and what are some of the benefits of being on either or. More so the carbon footprint of the materials and processes, how much construction waste is going to be on-site as opposed to if something was built off-site, and also the insulation and the energy saving potential. I think that's the main goal at the end of the day. With climate change, what's coming down the pipeline, I notice a lot of communities are flooding in Quebec. So we got to consider about, it's not only the flooding in the land, but also the surface runoff from higher elevations that are occurring in the backfields, right? That's actually going to pass through the field, that pass through the community. So there's a lot of environmental performance factors we have to consider in terms of specifically foundation design. It's going to be very important to consider that, as you move forward. And so it's a very interesting puzzle to put together. And as we move forward, these are always going to be factors in the back of our mind as we move forward, right? So some of the other criteria is a life cycle cost, labor intensity, supply chain complexity. If you're doing a very specialized type of build, is there a supply chain tied to that? Or is it a one-off and then you have to completely come back with a different set of ingredients to do repairs, etc. Operational carbon, recycling, air tightness, thinking about the building envelope, the load bearing capacity, not only of the structure, but also the soil in itself, right? The building has to carry its own weight and the soil has to carry the rest of the building. Fire, moisture, pest resistance, modifiability, being able to make changes after post-construction. If the family gets bigger and bigger, are you able to add rooms to it? So these are questions that we have to really consider as you move forward in terms of your site selection. The flexibility, the aesthetic appeal, that is something we can play with as we move through. These are all factors that we're considering. And again, obviously, we have to stay within a certain set of building code compliances, whether it's Quebec or the National Building Code, which tends to regulate on First Nation communities, and then plus also the public and market acceptance from the community. How does the community see the construction of your new facility? So this is the kind of aspects that we're looking at. These are the design ingredients that we're going to be measuring against as we move forward, and the materials that we move forward with, and even the form of the building. How is that going to work in terms of light, air, passive strategies? So moving forward, one of the things that keeps coming up is the notion of rammed earth, right? So what you see on the left-hand side here are key aspects to consider. We talk about the capital cost, the construction time, embodied energy, carbon, and the thermal performance of each facility. So in many regards, I don't want to dive into the specialty or give you information about this construction because I don't think we're versed enough in each one of these typologies. I think a lot of the stuff we hear so far is just like what we get from a pamphlet or a website. So there's a lot of other factors that go into each one of these building forms. So I don't want to sell ourselves short or sell the community short in terms of what it is we're looking at. We just want to make sure that we are going about it in the right way and that we're looking at the key factors in terms of what it is you're going to be looking at, and obviously looking for the long-term investment for the community. So the first one was obviously some type of hybrid construction that's going to involve the rammed earth construction. It's going to involve some aspect of wood. I can't see the roof in itself being made of rammed earth, so there's going to be a hybrid component to this. Even with the floor system, whether it's going to be slab on grade or if there's going to be a two-story rammed earth, you're going to need some sort of platform construction to go across on it. So you're looking at a rammed earth hybrid construction type of facility. Then you have your traditional small-scale multifamily platform housing, 2 to 3 stories. Again, very standard construction, traditional platform, wood materials to choose at, plenty of materials, plenty of opportunity to replace windows, doors, building envelope, facade treatment, HVAC system, etc. So this stuff kind of gives you a sense of adaptability and to make modifications as you move throughout the life cycle of the facility. Another one that we looked at last week, we shared with the community, was an idea of a prefab house. Again, this would be another type of hybrid construction. Again, for most of us who do know a bit about prefab construction, it's made in a facility, or if it's SIP panel, a lot of the stuff comes down to quality assurance, tight envelope conditions built in a factory where the conditions are good, the working conditions are good. You got a very skilled labor force already at play, so there are not a lot of mistakes in the process. A lot of it is just site preparation, ensuring that you have the right foundation in place, and then you drag and drop, right? And so there's many plentiful benefits to this type of construction. Another one was hempcrete that we looked at. Again, this is going to be another hybrid construction, in terms of what it offers. It is somewhere along the lines of rammed earth in terms of its environmental performance and the light footprint that it offers, the embodied energy that goes into it, the recyclable energy, the efficiency. There's not a lot of toxic materials that come out of this. It could last for 100 years, but there is going to be maintenance and upkeep. You still have to go out and you've got to maintain the building envelope in some form, whether it's plaster or whether it has sheetrock over top of it, whether it has plywood and has vinyl siding over top of it. It's more so the performance value of the building itself, right? But it does offer an idea that you are working with a natural environment and you're trying to look at an alternative building method at the same time. And in consideration in terms of what the community is looking at, we did listen. We are aware about affordability. That's going to be a process I believe the community is going to have to determine in terms of who's going to move into the residence, and what kind of structure you're going to have set up for the community to move forward. I think we're all in agreement in terms of the durability and maintenance. We want to deliver, the best bang for your buck, in terms of what's out there. And based on what you see in front of us right now, you can say each one of these methods are tried and true. They are both, beneficial, but each of them have different pros and cons, right? So we're going to share a bit of that afterwards too. And again, coming down to quality control and delivery time, I think that's very important. Whether it's a pilot project or whether it's a prefab construction, which is, you already have a very skilled workforce in place. The pilot project, I get it. You want to build capacity for the community. You want to work towards Red Seal. You want to build a new skill set in the community. But then you ask yourself, how far can that skill set reach into something, whether it's a new technology like CLT or whether it's basic traditional platform housing, right? It seems to be a proven method to go with. I think it seems like every community across the country is still building traditional platform construction, right? Just because of the efficiency and the simplicity of it. And then obviously capacity building, we are considering and listening to what the community has to say, skill development, but at the same time, we're hoping the community will think about leveraging local and community resources. So what's at play? What kind of prefab or opportunities are within your community within let's say 100-mile radius? That's really going to bring home the cost, the capital cost of your project to get it off the ground. So there's a lot of things that we have to consider. And again, it's going to come down to the typology and the construction methods. And again, those 4 aspects that we want to look at as building criteria, performance values that go into a facility. That's going to be really important. And so part of our process right now, in terms of looking at the 6 different forms, we've done some preliminary research. And, in terms of capital cost, in terms of from low to high, and some of the notes that come with each one of these different types of platforms. I'm hoping the housing committee will step back, and take a look at the 6 different options you do have in front of you, and you weigh the pros and cons to each one of these types that you might want to look at, right? And so when you think about the upfront capital costs, and we'll break this down as we move forward through the feasibility study, but what we can say right now, just based on preliminary research, that the traditional platform housing is the lowest capital cost level. Right, it's the most common and cost-effective building method right now. The mature labor market and supply chain is there. It's highly optimized for speed and budget. So, you see the low capital cost. And then number 2 comes in as the prefab housing, which is low to moderate. Savings from a factory built efficiency, again, quality control, low labor cost because you've already got a skilled labor force in play. You got quick assembly, offsets, upfront design expenses already taken care of. So when you think about prefab housing, site preparation and how to position what it's going to look like is another thing to consider. Then you got structurally insulated panels, which is a hybrid system. I would say even the prefab is a type of hybrid system too, when you think about the foundation you might have to design for. But SIP panels are more moderate. They're a bit more expensive. They're fast assembly. That's what's really nice about them. They do reduce labor cost and improve the thermal performance. That's what the SIP panel is all about. It's about the performance value of the building envelope. And then there's hempcrete construction. That's moderate to high, in terms of construction. It's low cost materials, but it does require a high labor intensity in terms of putting it together. It's almost like Lego blocks, laying cinder blocks on site. It doesn't require as much mortar. It's higher. I imagine, requires a very entry-level type of skill set, but somebody who does have experience working with it at the same time. It does require timber frame housing, a bit of timber frame construction to it. There's added cost to that. It's still a niche in Canada, so there's fewer contractors with it, but it is a nice envelope to consider. When you think about rammed earth comparatively, when you look at rammed earth, it's a high capital cost to begin with. It's very labor intensive. It's slow. It needs specialized skill and equipment to do it at the same time. It's got a low material cost, but it's got the high labor cost on the other end. Right, so this is kind of like a one-off at the same time. And then finally, you got cross-laminated timber, which is the highest capital cost entry level. It's a high material when manufacturing costs. Specialized installation requires a crane use, no different than prefab housing or SIP panels. It's got excellent performance, but it's expensive up front, right? So these are the capital cost breakdown of the 6 typologies that you're looking at. It's something to consider as you move forward with the evaluation process in terms of where the community wants to go. Once we complete our feasibility study, we'll have more information to round out this conversation and add more details to it. So I just wanted to give you guys an evaluation framework this evening in terms of what our research has come to conclude and where each one of these different types of construction stand in relation to each other. Again, capital cost, construction time, embodied carbon, thermal performance. These are just some of the definitions tied to each one of these things. Capital cost, high thermal performance, low embodied carbon, faster construction methods, construction times, natural to low carbon materials, fast builds may use prefabricated or high carbon materials, time intensive construction increases and finances and labor costs. Embodied carbon, I think that's the big thing, when it comes down to the material choices that we're going to be working with, the natural materials. And then at the end of the day, when I hear stories about maintenance and energy costs, thermal performance is an important factor to consider. And so finally,
Jay, can I ask you a question? Did you consider the cost of transport, for example, prefabricated housing in the cost?
At this point, no, these are just some of the high points that we're looking at. It depends, like if you were to pick a prefab, let's say within 100 miles of Montreal, we would do some research and try to find out what are the prefabricated facilities within your region to look at, right? It's one thing to buy in Ontario and on Quebec or even New Brunswick, right? So these are things that are going to come into play as we continue to do our feasibility study. And we'll be able to hopefully approximate this based on the final design outcome, what that's going to be, whether it's a 1, 2, 3 bedroom facility. So these are costs that are going to come into play as we move forward. So that was the evaluation frameworks, really pushing forward the aspects of the capital cost of the thermal performance. Capital cost level. Again, this is the ranking, in terms of what's going on. I just wanted to reinforce some of the stuff that's going to go inside there. This is pretty much the previous slide as I went through earlier on to low to moderate capital cost levels. What I want to do now, I'm going to stop right here. I'm going to stop sharing for a second. Is there any questions at this point? I just want to be mindful, like it's already 5 o'clock. I want to have time for conversation about the slides or anything, but at the same time, we also want to share information about the survey.
Can I ask about the prefab? If we do prefabricated, can we not do that in community? I know we don't have the place right now, but let's say we have our school or shop here. If we ever get that building, can we not bring that here? Instead of looking in Ontario or
Isn't that
your
your plan?
plans anyway?
In order to create or build a manufacturer that prefabricates, that you're talking about a lot of machinery and it's very expensive.
Because these things come in sections as they're built.
Yeah, I know how it
Yeah.
works. We just to assemble it. That's it.
Yeah, so again, we're just painting a picture tonight, right? We're just showing you 6 different options, and for the most part, aside from number 1, that is like one standard method of construction. I think the other 5 is going to be a hybrid type of construction, right? So they are going to require some aspect of built, foundation design. It's in terms of what the community wants to do, in terms of if you're looking for quality assurance and you want a good product, prefab seems very favorable these days. But if you're trying to build skill, which is very basic skill in the community, and you're working towards red seal, obviously you got your traditional platform. Brian, is there anything you'd want to contribute in terms of just understanding?
I think Corinne raised some good points about location and shipping, and these are just kind of, as Jake said, like a high level look at general approaches to these construction types. So as we go forward in the feasibility study, gather more information, we'll be able to, I guess, hone in a little bit tighter on what capital costs look like, or other considerations from the community that may start to rank these systems in a different order.
The ranking you see out here is just, doing a very quick environmental scan in terms of how the industry looks at these typologies. And, CLT has been around for a number of years now, and platform housing has been around forever. And everything else in between has, come in within the last 25, 30 years. So we're looking at all the options, but also really trying to make sure that the product you guys are looking for is of high performance value. It's got a good investment return. It's quality construction, and it doesn't require a lot of repair, operation and maintenance. Like at least if the repairs have to be done, they are within the reach of the community and the skill set of the community. Sometimes, you don't want to build a building that's a computer box. I've seen pilot projects at different universities where they are a computer box. Everything's about passive design, and you can't break the window envelope, and all of a sudden everything goes out of whack, right? So to be very careful in terms of how you want to approach this housing design. It's got to be within reach of the community and the maintenance of the community. And yes, it builds capacity at the same time, but also it provides you with a lot of flexibility, right? So I think these are things that we have to consider as you move forward, and to really come at it with those high-end values in terms of capital cost, construction time, embodied carbon, and thermal performance, and make sure that everything aligns with some of the efforts of the community in terms of their stewardship values, the land codes that you guys are pushing forward, some of the cultural values they want to maintain, all the stuff that comes into play. So we've looked at all the information that you have so far, and as we continue to write the feasibility study, and hopefully at the end of the, we're going to go through the consultation you did the other day, Corinne. We want to go through that some more and listen to what the community had to say. But at the same time, we also want to have our survey on our end. And so, like I said earlier on, the survey that we put together deals with the social, cultural, the environmental, the economical, and the technical aspects of housing. So we broke it down into 5. So what I want to do now is I'll open the survey so we can all take a look at it. I believe Ryan's going to put the survey link in the chat box for you guys to look at. The way I set it up here is that we can share this information with you later on, Corinne and Amy, and you can put this on your community bulletin and give the community. We've left the community survey open for 30 days. We want to make sure that everybody can access this. So when you click on the link, we'll make sure that the link works. So what you see here is the survey. We've opened it up for 60 minutes. In order to move forward, it's pretty straightforward. Like I said, there's a prompt at the very beginning. So I'm going to hit preview right now. And so when the community logs into the survey, it gives you a brief idea of what the feasibility study is about, right? And so you're invited to participate in this questionnaire as part of a housing feasibility study aimed at using different construction methods in your community, right? So once you start it, you do have the option of actually, when you hit the link or the QR code is going to work, you can do it on your computer or you can do it on your mobile phone, one or the other. So we're going to hit the start button. And so to begin with, I've broken down the feasibility study. I gave it some context. There's 25 questions. As you respond to each item, focus on your thoughts and feelings based on your own personal experience of housing. There are no right and wrong answers. This is not a test, and the information will solely be used towards the feasibility study. All findings will be utilized to prioritize the integration and celebration of Kanesatake tradition, culture, meaningful forms that will guide the project. That's going to help guide us through our design process. We'll think about your experience in creating housing that honors culture and supports families towards a stronger future. I think that's something we all want for our communities, to have a stronger sense of our identity and our relationship with our neighbors. In your input will offer valuable insight to guide the development of this pilot project, right? So in terms of just giving a sense of, somebody just wants to get in, so let them in. So that's the instructions of it. It's 25 questions, fairly simple. So the first one is about social cohesion. My current housing helps me feel connected to my neighbors. I think that's an important question because based on your site selection, where does the community want to be? Does it want to be somewhere in the bush, or does it want to be near the recreation center? Does it want to be by the water, et cetera? We don't know yet, right? So we'll get a sense in terms of how the community feels. That's what we're looking at. Again, this is the first 5 questions are about social. The second question talks about the layout of the homes. Does it support extended intergenerational families? We understand that the longhouse is built on a family structure. So this idea, if we can have a sense of community, socialism, we can design the house in a certain way that hits on some of these targets that we're looking at. In terms of shared space, there are cultural zones, there are gathering spaces, there are outdoor zones, there are different parts of a house that are very important to a community at the same time. So we're looking for a set of answers from strongly agree to strongly disagree, right? So we're just trying to gauge the temperature of the community. In terms of cultural gatherings and ceremonies, should that be considered as part of your housing design? When I looked at the longhouse, it speaks culture from the get-go. The building envelope, very light on the ground. There is a social hierarchy within the longhouse that is very interesting to look at. So we're going to try to unpack some of that. I feel safe and that I belong in my current housing setup, right? So we're talking about safety, and we're talking about sight lines, and we're talking about sight lines both inside and outside the house. So these are important pieces that we want to look at as we move for the housing design. So that was the first 5 questions in terms of social. I think the survey shouldn't take that long for a community member.
Okay.
So the
Thank
cultural
you.
needs.
Make sure that we get it, and we'll fix it up on this side too.
For sure, we can do that. We can share that. In terms of culture, again, this is all about culture, right? Does the home reflect the cultural values and traditions of the individuals, right? So we want to make sure that we hit that mark. Housing design should include visual architectural references to Kanesatake identity. I think that's important, when you think about the facade treatment of what it's going to look like, but not only on the outside, but the inside and how relationships are built. My home supports traditional practices. There are different types of food preparation and ceremonies that go into different First Nation cultures. So we want to make sure as we do our design-based research, that stuff is actually integrated into the process. Elders, knowledge keepers should guide the guiding process. It's not only about their knowledge, but accessibility for the elders in the community and the knowledge keepers in terms of how families were held together at the time, right? It was about the family unit. So are we designing communities that are built for segregation, which you would normally see in, municipalities, or are we designing for a more inclusive environment, right? So we're thinking about from that perspective. And how should we include spaces for cultural activities, whether you're doing artifact making, regalia, smudging, drum making, etc., right? Whether it's a water drum, etc. So there's a lot of different ways that we're going to go into this. So we are doing our due diligence in terms of how this survey is being catered and the information we want to gather at the same time. So when it comes to the economy now, this is where, again, we're trying to hit this project in 5 different parameters that's going to assist the community, in terms of the information, not only for this project, but it's also going to help for maybe the next housing phase at the same time. So is your housing affordable in terms of rent, maintenance, and utilities? You did express, Amy, that there's a lot of, expenses required just to maintain the house in terms of heat and energy. So this is something that we have to think about when it comes to a building envelope. Again, some of those housing typologies that we shared with you, whether they're a very tight envelope, whether it's okay, Ryan, thanks. The type of construction method that's going to go in there, we're looking for a very high performance value facility that's really going to help with your investment up front. Would you support the use of local materials if it helps reduce construction costs? Again, there was 6 different types that we're going to be looking at locally sourced materials. Sometimes the material might not be in your backyard. It might be 100 miles away. There are strategies to designing this facility that, what if we designed a facility that everything was within a 50-mile radius? That could be, a very efficient project in terms of capital cost and investment and local resources. I'm not sure how far the cleanest soil for a rammed earth project is. It might be 10, 15 miles away. I'm not sure, right? So we got to think about storage on site as well. All these factors that come into play with each one of these different type of construction methods that you're going to be looking at. Do you think investing in sustainable housing now could reduce cost in the long term? Yes, if we come away with a better project, a better efficient project, it's going to save you in the long run, and it'll help you with operation and maintenance at the same time. Should housing projects be designed to allow for income generation, rental units, home-based business space, etc., right? So these are questions that I believe, when you do your housing strategy or your policies for your housing, these are questions that are outside our realm of design. This is, I believe, decisions that you're going to have to make as a committee in terms of how these houses are going to be operated. And then how likely are you to participate in cooperative housing or community-led housing initiatives, right? Again, does this triplex become a co-op model? I don't know if that exists in your community right now. Is it community-led housing initiatives? Is there a specific theme to your housing development? So these are things that we want to actually investigate and hear what the community thinks at the same time. So that's about 15 questions about economic viability. When it comes to ecological strategies, again, we're thinking about your larger stewardship model and how you're trying to position your facilities in the future moving forward and making sure that they comply with the land-based code that you have going for yourselves. Do you think housing should incorporate traditional knowledge? That's important. I think if we're going to try to capture some sort of Haudenosaunee Longhouse form, there is a sense of knowledge that goes into that, right? So we are aware of that. How important is energy efficiency in your home? Insulation, solar, passive design. I can say that most of our traditional longhouses right across the country are built on passive design principles, right? So we know that is inherent quality with every longhouse across this country. So we are going to be playing with those ideas about open space, air circulation, light, mobility, etc. Insulation, tight envelopes, light materials, solar gain, orientation on site. I know, it's one thing to put a house on the corner unit just because it's efficient, but is it in the right location in terms of east to west axis, especially if you're trying to consider a greenhouse? How does a greenhouse integrate with a house at the same time? And you got to think about the transmission of moisture content within a greenhouse to a tight envelope. So there's got to be some conversation there in terms of what that's going to look like. And that's going to be a technical resolution in terms of how do you put a greenhouse within a house in itself, right? So there's a lot of performance values we got to consider. Are you concerned about the impact of current housing construction on the local environment? So if this is going to be a pilot project, what's it going to be? I think, again, during the feasibility study, we're going to look at the pros and cons to each one of those typologies and find out which one is going to give you an opportunity to grow. If it's a traditional platform houses, you can add a room, etc. But then if you go with something a bit more concrete, whether it's hempcrete or rammed earth, Once you get that first piece in place, and how do you build onto it? It's not like you're just adding cinder blocks, because once the formwork is removed, then you got to go back and you've got to somehow join that again together. And then all of a sudden you're compromising structural integrity over some other system. So these are very important factors to consider in terms of the material that and the method that you want to choose to move forward with. Would you support using renewable or recycled materials in housing projects? Again, as we go through the criteria, we are going to be looking at the embodied the embodied energy process from start to finish. Some houses can be built with a lot of recyclable materials, right? In terms of what we're looking at, and that's not only the major structural envelope, but also the interior finishes of the facility themselves. So we're going to be looking at that, whether it's carpet, whether it's tile, etc. The finishes that are going to go in there. I shared with you that one slide. 30% of the final outcome is the interior finishes of the facility, right? So there's a lot of things that we have to consider as we move forward. So that is the last question in this section is, how do you feel about incorporating off-grid or low-impact infrastructure into new housing? Composting toilets, rainwater harvesting, these are passive design strategies, again, that could help with the facility, whether it's about the type of roof, the roof design, how do we capture that? Whether we're off the grid, is this going to be an off the grid type of pilot project, or is this something that's going to be tied into the existing infrastructure already? The notion that we have to find a well service possibly for some of these facilities is going to be another thing. So that's the first 20 questions in terms of ecological. So the final 5 questions is based on technical training. So listening to you guys talking about red seal development and building a sense of a workforce in the community. Would you or someone in your household be interested in training to help build or maintain homes in your community? And obviously that's a yes for most communities. I think we want to build local capacity, but at the same time, we want to make sure that the skill set we build doesn't move on to another community or decides to go move to the urban environment, and all of a sudden we train somebody who actually takes that skill set and decides to move somewhere else. So you have to consider some of the factors that go into this. Should housing projects provide local employment and apprenticeships during construction? I think that's the goal for every First Nation project, to build capacity for many communities. So that seems to be an instant yes. Do you believe there are enough training community members to maintain housing infrastructure? Pending on the type of construction again, right? I think, if it's a traditional platform, we're going to get a lot of individuals who know how to swing a hammer and use a scale saw. But then there's going to be other technologies, whether it's CLT or prefab, there's going to be other skill sets that are going to be required. And pending where you want to go with the community and the investment, the return you get on the type of housing construction, it's best to build upon that than actually to build another skill set, another skill set, another skill set. So I think that's the way to move forward. Would hands-on technical training in housing construction be available for youth in your community? I believe so. I think we are trying to build that next generation of builders, in our community. And then the final question is, how important is it that housing initiatives build long-term capacity within the nation, Kanesatake Nation, to manage housing independently? And again, that's a question on your end, right? Does the individual have technical capacity or technical skill, but also has administration skill, in terms of working with your housing policies and your committee, as part of the committee? So the questions are set up in a way that, we're looking for a wide range of information that's going to really inform the type of facility that we're looking at. So I'm going to stop sharing here. Again, you can either do it on computer or you can do it on your mobile phone, one or the other. We'll get the link to you in the QR code, and then we can have you guys share this on your community bulletin and have you guys share it with your peers and families and friends across the community. I'm going to stop right there. I think, what time is it here? It's 5. I think 7:20 over there in Kanesatake. So I'll leave it at that. If there's any.
I have a question. The one question where you stated youth, does it have to be restricted to just youth? Like, because when you say youth, then that to me considers just maybe school age or out of school, but
Gotcha.
I want to be able to extend that to mature adults that are interested, men and women.
Okay, we can do that.
I want to be able to emphasize on that word youth. I would like that word youth changed somehow, so that it makes acceptable for our women, our men, not just youth, because hey, there's young women and men that are in their 30s and And when you say youth, I say,
Forties and fifties.
there we go. There
Perfect,
we go.
okay.
Thank you. Thank you. Exactly
you-
what I'm talking about. Thank you.
So you do have access to the survey. By all means, before you move forward and putting it on the bulletin, go through it and you tell us if if there's terminology you want to change or if there's parameters you want to change to each one of those 5
That's-
sectors.
That's
Take
a
your time
big key one there for me to change
and,
that
and,
word youth.
and get back to us. So before we actually move forward with actually putting the survey out to the community, we are going to keep the survey up there for 30 days. That's the intent.
Yeah.
So we can actually, because we still got like a number of weeks to get through the feasibility study and concept and site evaluation, et cetera, right? So,
We could even put an insert in there that it's not just towards youth, geared towards youth training. And the other question I have is how, out of all of these, which includes the Red Seal training? I know Rammed Earth is. So what other ones? Are there gonna be Red Seal training for all of those that were displayed?
The effort was made for the render.
For Rand, or is any other one?
hey, Ryan, you want to?
Considered training,
Timber frame.
timber frame, the two.
Yeah.
Okay, so I think
So
that
do
they aware of that in that section also about the training. That
I think I think it would be important for us to hear from you what kind of skill set you're looking for within a Red Seal training.
well, like I said, I want to be able to make that last. Number one,
Okay.
my biggest priority is to advocate that it's not just youth, but
Yes.
so that it involves single parents, single women, like all of us. Like she said, up to, you can swing a hammer, then can't we get
Yep.
some kind of certification and qualifications within our
Okay.
own, and that's my biggest thing. I'm advocating for that.
Yeah.
The biggest.
Thank you.
Okay.
There are some additional incentives for youth. That's probably why it was specifically.
Okay, if they could, maybe that's something else again, that we could stipulate or make a footnote at the end or something. Again,
Should be equal.
clarifying that
For any
it's not just for
For any
youth, but
gender.
youth encouraged. Like I say, we had a gentleman now where the dad and the son are involved in training. Both of them
So-
were in the program. Both of
So let
them.
me-
So it was the dad and his son.
Let me do a bit more research in terms of what the Red Seal addresses and what it covers at the same time.
Yes, that would be
Okay.
nice. Thank you.
And I'll include that into the feasibility study in terms to support the argument, the selection
Thank
process.
you. Thank you.
Okay.
I appreciate that very much. Thank you.
I know that the adult education is actually designing a construction program. So maybe, those can be like additional modules.
That would be nice. If it doesn't hurt to put it in there, then why
Yeah.
not?
Yeah, if it fits in with the.
That's what I'm saying, if it fits, because I believe the more that you extend it, the more involvement we're gonna get. Because like I said, we have these ladies right here that just finished doing construction
And are sitting here.
classes and waiting for the next.
Okay.
At the same time, if you bring in your youth thing, they got way more money than we did, over
That's right.
35, so
That's
that's
right,
like,
like you said, the adult education, that's why we're bringing that back, a big thing for that. A big advocate.
So from what I'm hearing right now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to put a section in the feasibility study based on capacity development and try to address each one of these things, right? Okay. And we'll try to cater it specifically to the different typologies that we're looking at.
Yes, thank you.
Okay, no worries.
A lot of the women end up starting their careers later. And they're studying later after raising their kids. Being a stay-at-home mom was so important, so I had to do it, and I didn't start my work here until I was in my early 50s, late 40s. So, for someone like me, where I ended up only finishing my studies in my late 40s, then, that's where I started my career. Because my kids all grew up and went out of the house, started families of their own, and it was my turn now.
yeah,
I'm not alone here.
no.
It's important that the women that are in these categories have proper training and open some doors for them.
Just to have the opportunity as it is, just an opportunity.
Whether it's a single woman or a single man,
Either or, you know.
That's right. Regardless of
Yeah.
age, if you're healthy, if
Age or gender, yeah, exactly.
I want to get
I
that.
find that's
When I'm more
important.
youth, I want to get, you know, it's great that we want to get our youth involved, but.
Yeah, I know, I had a problem with that during
Like
the,
like Cheryl just said,
I
you
kept
know,
saying, you know.
it's getting our late start in life here.
Mhm.
Okay, so I'm going to go through the recording again a second time, listen to all the conversation, take note of what you've shared this evening. If there's any further questions, I think it's important just to make sure that the feasibility study is not just about the selection of one type of building, but it's going to support the community in many other facets, from capacity development to their land code and any other investment that you guys are looking forward to, right? I could tell you right now, the feasibility is coming along nicely right now. You know, we've got a lot of good hard information, and just looking forward to diving into it for the next couple of weeks and really fleshing out some of your needs at the same time. Is there any further questions? Do you want to talk about tonight's presentation a bit more? If there's something that needs further clarification?
I think we've covered
Well,
all line.
I just have a question in terms of timeline. What is the timeline, what does the timeline look like? Like, I want to see if it's possible, or am I being realistic in pushing to try to start the first triplex this year?
Ryan?
We've chatted before about our team expediting where we can or finding ways to overlap, and we've already started doing that with prepping the feasibility study in advance of the workshop here, and we're going to do the same with design as we get information from the feasibility study and community feedback. So we're just going to try to advance each of those phases a little bit as we can. But some of that will come down to the cost estimate, the results of the feasibility. So in terms of our ability to help move things along, we'll do everything we can to expedite the schedule, but there will be some sign-off pieces in there and some decision making on whether one approach is the best one for the community. So yeah, that's not really an answer. That's more just saying we're here to work with you to make it go as fast as possible, but still be true to the process of making sure that the final product is what the community wants and needs.
I'm wondering, so we do have money.
So, yeah, that's where I was getting to.
Can we start building these
Exactly.
as a kind of physical part of the feasibility to see exactly how much it costs too? So there can be the feasibility costs and then the actual by the end of like this year. I think we need to sit with ISK and propose that and see what they say. We have money. Are we obligated to pick just one way, one? No.
No, that's what we're doing.
And that's what
We're not picking one, but we're gonna do one anyhow,
okay.
because we want to train,
Yes, we want.
Yeah.
We want to train.
Again, that's my
But-
big thing.
But we may then, let's say we do the feasibility study and the feasibility study shows that the timber frame is really a much more effective or much more, advantages for the community, in terms of cost and everything. Let's just say that that's what, after doing the feasibility study, doing a class C, a cost analysis, a life cycle cost analysis, which will include like the insurance, and it's gonna include energy efficiency and all that stuff, to finally get a cost over time of what it's gonna be. And let's say the timber frame, we just going ahead and building the round earth, but let's say the feasibility study shows that the timber frame is gonna be the best choice, for example. And then we'll see with ISK, maybe they'll dictate that we go with timber frame, because we're gonna get, ISK is the one, Indian Services Canada are the ones who said you have to do a feasibility study. So, and we'll give you the money to do it. So, and they wanna make sure that it's affordable. They said, we don't want you to build, luxurious homes just because you want to do it and because you get certain money. We want to see the most cost-effective home. So let's say, for example, timber frame shows that it's the best option. The next year we would do timber frame and maybe we would then change for the rest of the homes, but we'll see what happens with the training. You'll still get the training on that one home. We'll still have people that can continue, having a certificate in Ramsworth to be able to build with Ramsworth. But at the same time, since we're going to have the rammed earth and then let's say timber frame in this scenario, we're going to have two to compare, like real life comparison, at least that. If any.
There's a question by Ryan. Ryan has a question.
Oh, sorry about that. I didn't see that.
No, that's okay. I was just going to follow up on some of the things you brought up, Corinne, that the feasibility study is meant to be like an ongoing reference and decision-making tool for the council and the community. So if at a future time you decide to explore a different building type or a different construction methodology, you can always go back to this. It gives you some pros and cons. You may have the opportunity to update it from a costing side of things. So it's not necessarily meant to point to one answer. It's an overall reference document with some recommendations to it. So it's in parallel to the pilot project for the housing.
Yeah.
And I believe too with the housing committee and we already got the history, we already got the numbers, we already got the costs. A lot of it's already been, a lot of the answers have already come out in the housing committee, and already the chiefs have already been made aware of, what it's already costing us with certain types of homes now and what we're running into. So I think,
That's pretty.
yeah, so it's just basically getting the opinion of everyone, because we got the numbers, we got, we did our homework there. We got the numbers, we already know how much it's costing us yearly, we already know what kind of things we're running into on a yearly thing. What our number one renovations, what, the things that are happening already and what we're continuously repairing is my thing. We already got the numbers. We got a whole file cabinet full, don't we, Cheryl?
Actually, we have a database full of it.
Well, see, this is what I mean. So regarding all of that, we've already got that information. It's just a step now, like Caroline says, we got the numbers, we got what we need. Let's get it in there and do what we got to do next to get this going. Get this feasibility study done for her so that we can, and like you said, again, giving is that comparison that they want.
I think what we wanted to do tonight was one, it sounds like you do have all the numbers, the rationale, the direction that the community might want to go, but then we wanted to give you the hard science numbers, in terms of the typologies that you're going to be looking at and the performance value of each of the 6 different types and what's going to give you the best return, in terms of not only value but also skill development. We do know, in terms after the election, that Canada is going to start moving towards prefab housing. There's a big investment to push that way. Right across Canada, right? So you got to look at the optics in terms of what's going on across the country. Where are investments going? And if you're looking to do a pilot project, and I can say, working with other nations for the last 20 years, there's every nation across the country has been trying to do a pilot project, looking for the poster child. And poster childs come and go. I'm sorry to say, but housing need is always there.
I have a question, like when I think of prefab, I think of modular. I don't think of a home that has a special character that, that is reflective of a culture. How would you, let's say we decided we want to go with prefab because it's the least expensive. How would you
right now from what I'm hearing around the table is that we are very singular in our thought in terms of the one typology that we want to go with. We haven't even thought about innovation yet. We haven't thought about how do you take rammed earth as a thermal mass that could be beneficial to a greenhouse, but it also can be a thermal mass on the inside of the house. So the rammed earth becomes an added feature to the house, both interior and exterior to the home. So it becomes a hybrid construction. It becomes a performance feature within a triplex that can be part of a greenhouse, but also part of the house, the foundation, the inside of the house, right? So we haven't even thought about innovation yet. So we have to get to the point of design development, conceptual development, run these ideas past you and see if we can actually hit this thing from both sides. Because right now we're just talking about one type of typology and we haven't even explored a combination of putting these together yet.
No, Jake, was it Jake?
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Jake, how do you know that they're going prefab?
It just seems to be the trend in terms of where things are going. People are looking for quality assurance. It's not just in urban centers like Kanesatake or Ottawa. It's happening in northern communities where many nations, many small communities are being challenged with forest fires, flooding, overpopulated communities. They have to get houses on the ground quickly because the turnaround time is there. And I know Kanesatake is not affected by a short window of construction season, like let's say somebody in the northern parts of Quebec, where you got winter conditions, you have to get in quickly. So prefab is a way to go in terms of quality assurance, in terms of speed and recovery. I believe I shared that with you earlier on, in terms of the advantages of working with different systems, right? The traditional platform housing is always going to be there. It's the most common cost-efficient method. The skill level, the training level is at a very intermediate level. Swing a hammer, learn how to use a skill saw, 16 inches on center. But then you've got a lot of other efficiencies that have to go in there in terms of, envelope, design, windows, etc. Right? But prefab, it's proven, to be very cost effective. It's efficient, lower labor costs. You've already got an infrastructure in place that's going to actually modify designs for yourselves in terms of the size you're looking for. I can't say enough about it, but I do see a lot of benefits in the other ones too. Like SIP panels, this is very good in terms of building envelope. Hempcrete, it seems like an alternative, low-cost material. Rammed earth, I can put those two in the same category when it comes down to working with low-carbon materials and the long-term benefits. But the upfront capital cost is another story. And then you've got CLT, which is very high performance, specialty material assembly, etc. So, like I said, there's a lot of pros and cons to each one of these construction types. It's up to the community to prioritize, where they are. You do have the numbers, you do have the interest, and moving forward, it's just a selection. All we can do at the end of the day is provide recommendations based on what we heard from the community, going back and forth with these conversations, and then leave it up to you.
Okay, I just because I'm a born skeptic, and I've heard in the past something kind of along the lines of corruption, where the majority of the Senate senators would have an investment stake hold in certain things, so they would be pushing those. So that's why when you said prefab, the first thing that came to mind was, well, how many people in the government may have an investment that they that have already invested into prefab, so they would be getting a return on it.
I can't speak to that. I can't speak to the politics of that. I just noticed, the trends. I think we all notice the trends in terms of how housing is being developed across the country, specifically First Nation communities. More often than not, if you do with the traditional platform housing, we get contractors in there who only do the basic requirements of housing according to code. You'll get the basic materials, the basic construction, and a lot of times that's where you get a lot of housing repair because of the inadequate housing standards that they go by and the material choices they choose. But at least we know with prefab housing, they might have regulations in terms of the building materials that they employ with the construction. Okay. So they.
Brant just had his hand up. I'm sorry, Brant. I didn't mean to still kind of make you wait.
Yeah. No. Well, just getting back to some of the benefits. Like I understand the draw of prefabricated housing. Essentially, like I guess maybe answering me and some why is it so attractive and why are Native communities and outside groups so interested in it? It's essentially industrializing housing production. I mean, instead of being stuck on site and doing stick frame housing and everything, you're taking all of the advantages of building inside of a controlled environment in a factory, with all the machines you need, specialized machines, and everything that can speed up production, and sort of Lego-wizing house building. So like you really start to tap into the benefits of economy of scale at that point. And it's really hard to like justify going against that economies of scale when you actually look at the numbers, because if all of a sudden you have a building or a company, or ideally an industry, because that's what it is, that can pump out, you know, 1,000 walls in 1 week, versus, you know, with the same amount of time and money and labor power, you could have crews on site building 120. You start seeing it. I totally get this. I would say one critique I have of it though is the traditional platform housing, prefabricated housing, and SNPs fall within the same problem of when we look at First Nation housing on reserves right now, and you list all of the critiques of it, which is quality sometimes, health issues stemming from like mold, fire, environmental, sometimes not upkeep, and everything like that. All of those still apply to traditional platform housing, because that's what's being used right now. All of the critiques of First Nation housing that are being in place right now apply to First Nation traditional platform housing. Kind of goes the same with prefabricated and structurally insulated SIPs a bit, because they're not that far of a divergence. All of the mechanical issues with traditional platform housing still apply to those. It's just the construction method and everything is different, making it more efficient. And that efficiency, a lot, yes, it like, I think the advantage of this is look at Japan. Japan, I think, is very invested in prefabricated housing because they're in a very disaster prone country. Like you look at the aftermath of tsunamis, they have a lot of earthquakes, a lot of fires, and everything like that. But they've built in a certain way that if a house is torn down, they can literally have a building up within a week. That's because of mechanization and everything like that. So there is that, and everything. Like if a house burns down, everything within a very short time, if you have the capital, you can have a replacement building on site very quickly. That is like a totally brand new construction. Whereas right now with like traditional platform housing and everything, you're waiting probably a season, depending on time of year and all that stuff. Whereas with prefabricated, you know, I would say the problem with that also is you're dependent on the industry and you're dependent on supply chain, because everything that happens with that, everything that, you know, if the factories all of a sudden don't have access to certain things because they are tied into a larger supply chain, all of a sudden the factories stop. So that's also a consideration with this. I'll leave it at that because I'm rambling too much.
Thank you for that, Brett.
But I still
A lot
don't get an answer for the question about the prefabricated homes. How do you integrate like cultural elements with prefabricated homes? Like, have you done projects where?
No, we
you
haven't, but that's where it's going to come down to, you know, layout, really trying to dig into the cultural form of a longhouse and what is the cultural values within the longhouse, about sense, about communal gathering spaces. We can move around design, you know, we can play with those ideas and really try to move in that direction and consider those. I'm not saying that prefab is just going to be a square box, 48 feet by 48 feet. It could be different dimensions. Again, it's going to come down to site selection, orientation on site. What does the site have to offer, and how can we work with the natural features of the site that's actually going to make the house part of the system, part of the natural system, right? So that is where innovation and creativity is going to come into play. Brian.
Just to add to that, on the prefab side of things, there's different levels of prefab as well. There could be for prefab wall assemblies. So there's elements of the building that are fabricated off-site, but it still allows for fairly custom and unique configuration of spaces within the building. So it doesn't necessarily restrict us as far as making something very specific to Kawasaki. It's just one way of delivering that a type of house.
I'm being mindful of time here. It's what is it, 7:50 over there? So just want to make sure that we stay on time. We got 10 minutes left.
Out of curiosity, what resources are you guys relying on when you're looking into like the more niche ones, like the hempcrete, earth, and CLT?
We're going to do a bit more information on that, and just see what kind of resources are within the region. Like, what can we look at that's really going to support this? So, like, we're not drawing on stuff that is halfway across the country, right? So,
have you guys been in contact with the rammed earth contractors we're looking at?
no, at this point.
Okay, I think maybe. Well, unless there's something outside of the contract that would prevent it, maybe a conversation or having a dialogue with I think the person we're talking about, Charles, or actually even Firewall, might be a good idea. Simply because we can point you in direction. There is very good data and studies on rammed earth and how to lower that construction cost and like to move it away from the niche luxury building and more into the mass production, more like what Australia is doing right now.
What is Australia doing right now? Do you know something I don't know? Because I saw some manufacturing in Germany, but I didn't really see it in
You want to be like Australia?
in Australia. But I just wanted to say that, yeah, Firewall actually has it in their mandate to assist Tawaw with any kind of details, that you're not familiar with. So there's they're happy to help. They have details, because they're experts in render. But I did mention it to Wanda last week that we should probably meet with them just to talk, just to get, I don't know, maybe they can do a small presentation and talk a little bit about more about costs and feasibility and things like that. So I didn't just let me know when you're available to do that. But there's we got an additional contract for them just to help you in the design process. So just FYI.
I think that's
Okay.
good.
We can look at, again, tonight was just about just giving you guys a broad picture, right, in terms of 6 different types to look at and what to consider and what are some of the key aspects to consider. The technical side, I understand you guys have the culture and the social side in terms of where you're going and your interest with Red Seal, but I think some of the harder numbers in terms of what we're looking at, when it comes down to these factors, I think it's very important to weigh in terms of your decision as you move forward. That was me. Sorry about that. All right. 7:50. Further
I
questions?
think with that Firewall, when it comes down to the traditional aspects, I think that's going to be an asset to try and give us a little more clear understanding of what that means to a lot. Because when I'm listening to this now, when you talk about ceremony and traditions and stuff like that, this is where I find there's a very fine line about that, to each their own per se, because it's so it's still divided here. To my knowledge, the Longhouse doesn't have their seats in order, so a lot of people, culturally and traditionally speaking, aren't even aware of a lot of the traditional Longhouse ceremonies and stuff like that. So I wouldn't want to push my cultural traditional, because I do come from a traditional bloodline, and I wouldn't want to have to say, push that on my neighbor if she doesn't even know what it is to sage.
Correct. Like I said earlier on, the next time we swing through and have a conversation, to focus on this idea of a longhouse, I'm going to be looking at the passive principles of a longhouse. I'm going to be talking about circulation, light, passive design strategies, these building performance factors that you can find within our vernacular. Those things are tried and true, and they're just as relevant as they are as today as they were yesterday. So we can actually bring those design features into this facility and reinforce it from that perspective.
Yeah, that would give a lot of energy.
Dan, go ahead.
Yeah.
We got a question from Dan. We have a question from Dan. Hey, Dan, go ahead.
Okay, I just got a question for the building committee. Do you have the policies and the regulations and the codes in place? Because that would seem to me to be the foundation for any kind of housing policy going forward. Do you have all that done already?
Well, we have a housing policy. It needs work. It's old. And regarding
So we've been meeting every week to revamp the 2007 housing policy. And so we're close to completion, but it's not completed yet, probably by the end of the summer.
And what about the regulations and building codes, and how are you going to enforce them?
We don't have any ways to enforce them at this time because we don't have a building department. But I have to say, that being said, any funding that you get from ISK, they require that you adhere to the building codes.
And hiring only
And
cleaners with
yeah.
the RBQs.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So, and having the Red Seal trade will enable the students to get a certificate and have like
Apprenticeship.
CCQ oversight. So, yeah, but right now, MCK doesn't have a building department. We don't have an inspector. We don't have building codes of our own, but we will adhere to the Canadian building codes.
So one of the things that I'm really taking a step back in terms of the literature that you guys have on your site, what you're working towards, and this is one of the things that really stood out to me: the mission statement that you have going for you. The Mohawk Council of Kanesatake emphasizes the importance to manage Kanesatake lands through best practices, providing efficient services, resources while advocating discretion, confidentiality, and professional ethics. And it goes on to talk about environment, habitat, natural resources, and ecosystem. The reason I looked at that is because housing is a very much part of that conversation, right? So trying to situate housing within this larger governance model that you have for the community is very important, because housing is governance for many nations, right? And so when I step back and take a look at that, I understand, codes, building performance, those are energy technical requirements. I'm really looking at what your mission statement has to say and how you're holding this housing project in relation to that. That is where I'm positioning this feasibility study as I move forward. So, Dan, thank you for your question. I can't answer anything based on your housing policies or where you're going with that or where you're at that stage. I'm only going at what's available in front of me right now. That's at public notification.
Yeah, do you have any concerns, Dan? When you asked that question, what were you thinking? Because we're going to have, engineering, everything's going to be stamped by engineers, architects.
Right now, it has to do with a lot of the land governance as well. I mean, people are building wherever they want. They're establishing businesses wherever they want. They're bulldozing, cutting trees. They're basically doing whatever they want without regulations, without laws. And so how can you actually come up with a comprehensive or coherent housing policy without the rest of that stuff in place first? If you don't control the land, and if you don't control zoning where business can happen, where residential or recreational stuff is going to happen, uh, it's chaos.
Yeah. Dan, I think at this point we kind of like it's a little bit of a chicken or an egg thing. I mean, if we have to wait before finding the solution to deal with people grabbing up land and building and everything like that before we build housing, which is a need in the community, we're going to be delaying this unnecessarily. I get that. I totally get that. But I mean, and another thing is there kind of has to be a little bit of trust in council. I mean, we're not doing this for self-profit or anything like this.
I'm not saying that, Brent, I'm not saying that at all. I'm not criticizing council. What I'm saying is that if you're going to go ahead with a coherent housing policy, you have to really pay a lot more attention to the codes, to regulations, to controlling territory, as opposed to simply letting people continue to run off and do whatever they want. To build
Okay,
casinos,
Amy?
whatever they
Are you
want.
going to give feedback on the lawmaking process? That's the first step. First step. Or not the first step for the law.
I would like to add, that I personally have been doing a little bit of research of my own, and I've been compiling the kind of skeleton of the makings of, because right now we have KILGA, which is an act, but it's necessary to have a governance code, a land governance code. So I've been looking into that, as well as a land use plan and a land allotment process, which actually addresses the what is it called? The unauthorized occupation of land. So those are some things that we can absolutely integrate into the strategy moving forward, and getting the community's feedback for that, because those, I believe, are essential in order to be able to merge the land issue with the housing needs, and address the limitations and the criteria and everything that's needed to move forward properly for this. So Dan, you were absolutely right. There is more structure that is needed to move forward properly, and that has been looked into, but I haven't had it's only bones. There's no meats. There's no, so it's very.
This is one of the biggest
It's at the beginning.
reasons why we start in the very beginning, when I started with the housing committee, that we did that revamp of the policy and procedures. And I believe in this process, we're going to become aware of those very things that we need to add to policy and procedure.
Yeah.
So I believe the only way that that's going to happen is if we keep proceeding, pushing forward, and putting as much as we can with research, with everything that we know, with the concerns of like what David has and everything else, and our knowledge of to that enforcement.
Yeah.
And like he said, you have to have some kind of faith. We have faith in you chiefs, where a lot of people don't at this point right now. They're afraid that you're not even considering working with these people that are unauthorized lands. But in saying that, like I said again, revamping policy and procedures, working towards the things that we know that are legitimately that we can put into this. So the more I see that we move forward, is that's when we're gonna get more clarity as to how we're gonna handle certain situations as they arise. So, because what he's saying, a lot of people are saying. So if we proceed as we are, we'll be able to address those a lot better.
So I'm
And
just
like
being
I
mindful of
said,
time.
again, policy and procedure. Like I said,
But yeah.
time.
So I'm just being mindful of time here. So I just want to clarify, the reason why I brought this up is I'm trying to situate your housing within your larger framework. Like I don't want to speak to your policies or what you're doing. I'm just trying to strengthen your approach to this project so it actually supports your larger mission statement, and anything else that occurs behind it has nothing to do with us. It has your conversation, right? So I'm just trying to really situate housing, the choices, the ecological, the habitat, the natural resources, the ecosystem. As long as your housing strategy or your housing selection complements that, it's a win-win. Right,
Exactly. This right there, what you said, allows us to move forward. As far as I'm concerned. With that alone, and what I'm saying, what we've addressed and what we have already allows us to move forward.
Lynn in here that had something she wanted to say.
Sure, go ahead.
It just seems like right now, the two methods or two ways of building that we're looking upon is timber framing and the round earth. So that's what we will proceed with, I'm assuming. For the pilot,
That's what we're getting out, feasibility study done for Edge.
Okay. Okay, because prefab is a good idea as well, but there's always little.
Again, we have to consider the quality. Prefab was around a long time ago.
Yeah.
So you have to consider why.
So we
Did
have.
they stop and we're only now hearing of it again? Like you said before, they choose that up north because it's the faster. It's the faster, but when it comes out, we got that. And we're running into 101 repairs.
Yeah. Keeping them standing, yeah.
$100+
Right. Just to address certain things.
Yeah. It's, that's why we're looking at a solution that with the longevity of the house, it will essentially over time bite into the renovation costs and drag it and push it down immensely. So if we end up going with rammed earth, and because it lasts for centuries, if we use that to replace the homes that are over $100,000 in renovations, that immediately removes that from our deficit, like from the renovation need. So it's
somewhere else.
Exactly. It's going to take that not a deficit, but that high ends that we can't, and it's gonna reduce it.
Yeah.
Very, very.
You
fast.
know very well, personally spoken, you spoke of it before, already addressing the repair needs that you've run into yourself, and I know you have too.
I do it myself. now.
That's right. Well, see, this is it. See, I've heard that expressed from both of you ladies. That you're doing it yourself. So now it's time for us to get somebody to help you do it yourself.
And we've seen other community members, their homes and.
Well, this is what it's, to me, prefab's nice, but I'm a big no on prefab.
Unless it's a summer cottage, I don't see it happening.
Well,
I just don't see how it benefits us as a community if we're getting it from the outside.
So by the end of June, the survey will no longer be there. And then, so I just wanted to.
We can shorten it. We can say a 2-week turnaround because it's the information we need to help fill into the feasibility study. Plus the information from your recording session too. We're going to be looking at that for the feasibility study. So we can say for 2 weeks to keep the survey.
Yeah, that would be better.
Okay.
What threshold? Because thinking that we can maybe go door to door and start getting some of these surveys completed, so it will go faster.
Yeah.
Okay, we can do that. We can set it up in a way that you guys carry a tablet with you and you just do it on your tablet and everything's compiled, right? Okay. Yeah. We can do that.
Okay. Because we're at a point where we open the door, but there isn't a lineup. So I think we gotta kind of Aaron Brockovich it over here.
Like I said,
Right.
when it comes down to it, a lot of them aren't aware of a lot of the things, what they even mean, what the big concerns are, where the committee already know, and you as chiefs already know. And them as tenants already know the problems.
Okay, if there's no further
So
questions.
I think, like I said, if you don't shorten that survey date, that will help us too, because we're trying to meet as much as possible as well.
Yeah.
Okay, that works for us on this end.
Okay, great. Well, thank you very much, Jake and Ryan. It was an amazing.
Thank you.
All right. Have a good evening.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Be in touch.
Yeah, everybody.
Thank you.